Good afternoon, everyone. If you could please take your seats. Welcome back. I'm Corey Wegner, Cultural Heritage Preservation Officer here at the Smithsonian Institution. I'd like to welcome you back to the afternoon session of Uniting to Save World Cultures, investigating the attributes of successful emergency cultural heritage protection interventions. And we had a wonderful morning session talking about building the capacity for resilience and some really interesting speakers. And I know we've had some time on the breaks and over lunch to talk about what we heard. This afternoon, we're going to move on. I'd just like to do a couple of housekeeping things. Again, we have been asked not to have food in the auditorium. Everybody's been remarkably well behaved. And to try to bring only water into the auditorium to drink. We are being live webcast, so keep that in mind. If your boss or your spouse doesn't know you're here, stay out of the view of the camera. And we are live Twittering, so our hashtag is Unite to Save. Please do Twitter when you see interesting things on the screen or you hear something that particularly strikes a chord. Feel free to share that with the Twitterverse. So this afternoon, I am very pleased to introduce our afternoon panel, Local Leadership During Crises. And I'm particularly excited to introduce Kys Liu, who is Executive Director and Clinical Associate Professor at Tulane University's Disaster Resilience Leadership Academy. And we were fortunate to, as part of our Mellon Planning grant that we're undergoing, have a consultation with Tulane University to talk to Kys Liu about his work at Tulane and his past experience in disaster response, and thought immediately that we wanted to have him come to speak at Smithsonian as soon as possible. So Kys will talk about the various questions that come up with local leadership during crisis. So please welcome Kys Liu.
Thank you, Corey. Good afternoon. Leadership makes a tremendous difference when preparing for responding to and recovering from disasters. And at the extreme, strong and effective leadership can mitigate the problem or perhaps prevent it altogether, whereas weak leadership exacerbates the problem and makes matters worse. And the reality is that with our escalating global disaster risk and vulnerability, we can't afford to have weak leadership. So for example, the United Nations reports that 5 times more people today are affected by disasters than a generation ago. And that the number of disaster-related events due to drought and earthquake and flooding has increased 4-fold over the last 30 years. This year alone has been a record number of people who have been forced from their homes due to conflict. Almost 60 million people this year have been driven from their homes. This is the largest number since World War II. So most humanitarian and disaster risk management experts are convinced that we can be more effective in saving lives, in alleviating suffering, and reducing the economic and social costs if we build the capacity of local actors to lead the way in their communities. So the question before us is, what is strong and effective leadership within the humanitarian context? Because unfortunately, much of what we know about leadership comes out of research based upon how leaders act, the roles within different sectors, within the business community, within the political, within the military community. So the question here is are some of those research applicable within our context? And a lot of that research as well is coming out of developing countries and not a lot that's emerging within developing countries and within communities that are most at risk globally today. So I want to take this opportunity just to briefly highlight a study that we had carried out in partnership with King's College, the Humanitarian Futures Program, and AllNet, which is the Active Learning Network for Accountability and Partnership. And this was a study that was carried out in 2 phases over the course of a year, where we looked at leadership that emerged both within the local and the international NGO context, as well as the United Nations. And this study highlighted 5 key leadership themes and traits that emerge that were highlighted from these stakeholders in terms of successful qualities of humanitarian leadership. And the first one is strategic leadership skills that relates to the bigger picture. And what that is that people who can understand the context, who are able to have a clear and strategic vision about what the operations goals and end goals are. Relational and communication skills. Leaders who are willing to listen and to learn from others. Leaders who are able to build relationships with key stakeholders. Decision-making skills and risk-taking skills. The reality is that within disaster situation, there's incomplete and inaccurate information, and leaders have to make decisions. They also must be willing to change those decisions when the context itself also changes. And they should be willing to be accountable for the decisions that they make. They need to have strong management and organizational skills. They need to be able to put strong teams together, to be able to also mentor and to lead by example. And then a whole host of personal qualities, the ability to be principled and to act with integrity. And the study is online. It's posted on our website, as well as on AllNet's website. It's a very interesting read, and it's starting now to kind of deepen the understanding, perhaps, about leadership qualities and traits within our community. And taken all together in terms of this study, what it really points towards is this relational leadership quality, the ability to be able to network, to be able to work with communities, to be able to engage in team building. But also, the reality is that at some point in time, leaders need to understand when to end the discussion and to be able to act decisively. And I saw a lot of these qualities and traits that were referenced very explicitly within the 3 papers of our panelists today. So I'm very much looking forward to the discussion. Now, I want to point out here that what we're talking about are disasters and not routine emergencies. And in this way, leaders who kind of deal with crisis do need a different type of leadership skills, whereas in routine emergencies, we evaluate leadership performance based upon best practices that are applied to routine phenomena. Whereas in a disaster situation, again, with how quickly things evolve, the need to be able to bring together various stakeholders, leaders need to be able to be willing to be creative and to be able to think outside of what is in the confines of existing bureaucratic guidelines. And though I do believe that our 3 panelists are going to provide different context in terms of local leadership as it relates in the context of Nepal and what we saw in the Ukraine. But I want to share with you an experience that I had back when I was with the US government. So from 2006 to 2009, I ran the Office of Foreign Disaster Assistance within the US government. And this is the office that's the lead coordinator for international disasters. And in 2007, the US government at that time was the largest contributor to humanitarian assistance with the situation that was unfolding, the crisis in Darfur. And what we started to recognize in 2007 was that very alarming indicators. We started seeing an escalation in terms of the numbers of targeted attacks against relief workers. We were seeing escalating numbers in terms of mortality rates and under 5 malnutrition rates, such that it prompted me and our team to be able to travel out to all 3 Darfur states, really to better understand what was happening on the ground. About a month before my travels out to all 3 Darfur states, in southern Darfur, the local militia and authorities had rounded up 23 humanitarian relief workers, and they detained them for 2 weeks. And the men were beaten and the women were sexually attacked, and it took the international community almost 2 weeks to be able to negotiate their release. So when I visited South Darfur, it was the first opportunity for the humanitarian community to come together because they were quite fearful of being again detained, and they were staying behind their compounds. And in this discussion, one of our partners that was with a NGO, he mentioned to me, and he mentioned to the group, that just that morning, he had to oversee the medical evacuation of 4 of his staff. They were coming back from a food distribution, and they were ambushed. And he told me as well that he was a local employee, that the international country director and deputy country director were kicked out of the country. So he found himself to be the most senior person in country. And his question to me and the group was, what do I do tomorrow? Do I send out my team and perhaps risk having them killed? Or do we stay in our compound and not be able to carry out our mission, not be able to support the communities that we're here to serve? And those are the types of decisions and that I believe that local leaders are making every day. And more often than not, they're being made by emerging actors who do not have necessarily the training, the experience to draw from. But nonetheless, they are being asked to make these decisions. So in order to counter this, what we've been able to do at Tulane University's Disaster Resilience Leadership Academy is a program that's being funded through the World Bank and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. It's called the Disaster Resilience Leadership Program that currently now is partnering with institutions and individuals in 25 countries. And what we're trying to do through this program is, at one level, to be able to try to strengthen existing capacity. So what we do is that we go into each country and we work with local universities, and we set up a local advisory committee to be able to provide contextualized executive level training, and we support fellowships, 1-year fellowships in each one of these countries. And the fellows are comprised of individuals from the ministry, secretarial level. We have mayors in there, but we also have private sector involvement and NGOs. And it allows these local fellows and stakeholders to really be able to come together with diverse backgrounds and lens to really look at the different risks that their communities face, and to be able to start a better understanding and also developing actionable policies around how to mitigate some of these risks. We found that by working with local universities and connecting academia with the practitioners, that we're also then able to address the future pipeline of leaders. And in this way, the universities, through this experience, are able to augment their existing graduate level program, or in many situations, they're developing new graduate level education around leadership and risk management. And therefore, we are able to have a very grounded, applied curricula that's relevant, that is educating future leaders, and we're connecting them with the practitioners. And across these countries, we are now putting together this community of practice, allowing peer-to-peer learning. And I think that's been the key to this, is that the curricula and the training that's being developed, we play a secretariat role, but the reality is that each one of these countries and university partners are able to learn from each other. And the fellows are not only consisting of fellows from that country, but they're also pulling in regional fellows to be able to manage and deal with these threats that are not only local, but you have to have a regional and a global solution to. So one idea, and I was discussing this with Corey, that came after the consultations when her team came to Tulane, is that we're about to move into the second phase of this program with support through the Gates Foundation. And we're very much now thinking about how to be able to add and identify core competencies to add to the curricula, both in terms of supporting existing practitioners as well as future leaders, to be able to promote the right policies, to make sure that resources are allocated appropriately, to be able to effectively save lives, alleviate suffering, but also perhaps to more to highlight the need to be able to preserve culture. So this is one idea that has come out, and I think that we definitely are ready to move forward. I'll end and conclude on a not so positive note, in the sense that all of this requires resources. And the reality is that when we look at our global budgets and humanitarian spending, less than 0.1% of our humanitarian spending goes to support local actors and local partnerships. About 0.3% goes to support local governments. So if we're serious about being more effective around these discussions, we're going to have to make sure that we get to the policymakers and the decision makers to be able to allocate the resources in a systematic way that can build this leadership capacity. So let me stop here, and it's my pleasure to be able to invite up Kamal, who will be able to provide a little bit more context in terms of the recent events in the earthquake response in Nepal. So thank you.